Tonight, we are learning Le'ilu Nishmat Harav Shmaryahu Yosef Chaim ben Yaakov Yisrael, as well as Le'ilu Nishmat Avram ben Chaim Yehuda and Yecheskel ben Avraham. We're also learning tonight Le'Refuah Shlema to Zechariah Shimon ben Cyril, and Namik Netaniel ben Miriam, and Liad Gittel bas Chana. Okay, so tonight, Be'ezrat Hashem, God willing, this will be the final of the series on Rav Chaim Kanievsky and the stories and the lessons that we can learn from him. Now, the idea behind these types of classes is not just, we have also Leilu Nishmat Ariel Chai ben Eliezer and Michal ben Yitzchak. Okay, so the reason behind these types of classes is not only to realize the godless, the greatness of Rav Chaim Kanievsky or whatever gadol that you may be listening to or we may be speaking about, but rather the main focus really is look at what he was able to accomplish. Look at the amazing things he was able to accomplish, and what can I do to change my life to just get a little bit closer to that greatness, or maybe to emulate the greatness of Rav Chaim or whatever it is, or any other gadol. So that really is the purpose. And I was, I was speaking to my brother-in-law, and my brother-in-law said, what you should do? You should ask to see from these classes how many people actually changed, how many people actually took upon themselves. And I was thinking about that, and I was like, in one sense, I was curious, but in another sense, I'm nervous, because what is the percentage of people? And let's be honest with ourselves, right? What is the percentage of people that they hear something or they see something and that's going to motivate them to change? Usually change takes a lot of work, and it's usually done when there's at a point of no return, or it's usually done at the course of many years. But how many people, and there are, by the way, don't get me wrong, there are people, there's a select percentage, a select few of every class that goes out, every shir that goes out, that people take that to heart and actually change their life. And as I was thinking about this, I'm like, where is the percentage? And then I was thinking further, where do I fall in this percentage? And I know over the past few weeks since Rav Chaim Kanievsky was nifter, I was thinking of different things, and I've come across situations where I was like, let me I sort of had a test, and I choose successfully in certain times, because of okay, wait, if Reb Chaim would have been able to do X, Y, Z, there was lessons that I took from Reb Chaim and I actually utilized it in my day-to-day life, but there are tests that I didn't, and I just slipped, and it just didn't, I didn't have that mindset. It's when I had that mindset that all of a sudden, okay, fine, now let me overcome it. So an idea that I, may want for, to share for everybody to go and think of themselves, to utilize the lessons that we learn from here for your own personal life. The purpose of these classes is that you should change to become a better person. And Baruch Hashem, I have to say that, the amazing emails that I've been getting, or the people are speaking to me over the phones, how this entire class that we've been doing for the past few years, these Thursday night classes, Baruch Hashem actually changed people's life, which is unbelievable. It's an amazing merit, the schut that I had to be a part of that. But when you think of it, the percentage of people, how many people, you see something, how many times does it take an effect and you actually do something about it? And 9 out of 10 times, I think it's safe to say that we get inspired or we hear things amazing, and it just doesn't change that much in our lives. So to put that little pointer out there, to make that class a little bit more successful, to make anything for that matter a little bit more successful, life, and this we're going to touch upon it a little bit later, Be'ezrat Hashem, life is full of opportunities. You have an opportunity to gain, you have an opportunity to lose. Let us use these lessons, these stories, for an opportunity to gain, an opportunity to change our lives, to become a better person, a better spouse, a better parent, a better daughter, a better son, a better employee, a better boss, a better Jew, a better in all angles. So with that introduction, I want to share with you a story that I really wanted to make it into the second class, but it didn't make it the cut because of the time. But this was a story that really shows the chesed of Rav Chaim Kanievsky and also the humility, the anivas of Rav Chaim Kanievsky. This is a story said over by Rabbi Nassim Einfeld. So this story goes back to 1997. And in 1997, this rabbi was Rav Nassim Einfeld. He had this pain in his leg. And he says over that he gets these pains every once in a while, but they subside, they go away. It was Simchas Torah, 1997, where all of a sudden the pain came. And it was not going away. And it was getting worse and worse. And he was at the point where like dancing with the Torah on Simchas Torah was out of the question. There was nothing to talk about. And not only that he went and he asked one of his friends if they could please get him a wheelchair that they'd be able to go and wheel him out. He couldn't even walk. When he got home, the amount of pain was forget about a Suda. He went straight to bed in excruciating pain, and he davened mincha in bed. He stayed in bed the entire time. After Yom Tov was over, he tried to find a doctor to see what was going on. Like what was this crazy unbearable pain. And he found a doctor that would be able to see him, but he had to go and he had to move. He was he says over the story, it was such every time his foot touched the floor, it was an excruciating pain. And not only that, he went to the doctor, and the doctor has to touch the foot. Every time he touched the foot, he was in complete agony. Like so much pain that we cannot even begin to imagine. And, he explains it as if you take a burning hot rod of metal, and every time someone touched him, that's the pain that he felt on his foot, like to understand the level of pain that he was going for. However, this doctor, he was searching and he was searching. He couldn't find a diagnosis for the problem. So he went back home. He was able to fall asleep. Then the next day, he called his regular doctor, which was thankfully able to make a home visit. Came to his house, pulled, pried, checked, twisted, turned, tried to find a reason for this problem. Nothing doing. It was inconclusive. He couldn't find the reason for the problem. So his doctor goes and gave him a very, very strong, prescription for painkillers. And he said, if this doesn't subside the pain, then you have to go to the hospital. He said it was close to Shabbos. He says if by after Shabbos your pain is still there, you must go to the hospital. And he wrote him a prescription. I guess this is in Israel. He wrote him a prescription to be admitted to the hospital to run, tests in X, Y, and Z because X, A, B, and C didn't work. So Shabbos came, Shabbos went, and the pain did not go away. So he went to the hospital. Motzei Shabbos, he goes to the hospital, and there was all the specialists that were over there. They were going and they were trying to run all these tests and diagnoses. Finally, they came back to him and they said, listen, he says, this is the issue. He says, you have tumors growing in your leg, and that's why you're having these problems. And they said, right now, we don't have an immediate course of treatment. For whatever reason, they couldn't give him a treatment, but they gave him even stronger painkillers to help. At this point, he goes and he calls Rabbi Elimelech Fira. Rabbi Elimelech Fira he's an Askan. He specializes in medical referrals in Israel. He does this to help people out, to make the connections, the shidduch between the patient and the doctor for the big specialist. So he calls up this Rabbi Elimelech Fira and he says, "Can you help me out? This is my situation. Who can I go to?" So he goes and he says, the best in the business is somebody by the name of Professor Dekel from Ramat Gan. He says, you got to go to him. So it's fine. He gives him the contact information. He calls up the office, and the office says, not a problem. We'll see you. We'll give you the next available appointment, which is in 4 weeks' time. He was like, I can't last 4 weeks. I'm in excruciating pain. And the secretary is like, what can I do? This is the next available appointment. You want me to push somebody out because of you? And he goes and he says, the rabbi goes and says, listen, I don't want anybody to lose their spot because of me, but maybe you could speak to the doctor on my behalf. And he goes on and he explains, he says, I went to the hospital, and the hospital said that there's a tumor that is growing in his leg. And if he doesn't do something fast, it's just going to get more difficult, more painful, and harder to operate on, harder to treat. So she says, okay, let me speak to the doctor. Hold on a second. She goes, she puts him on hold, comes back a few minutes later. And she says, the doctor hears your concern and he's willing to see you this coming Wednesday. And he's like, unbelievable. I'll take it. I'll take the appointment. That Wednesday, when he's about to go to the doctor, he calls up, his, Reb Chaim Kanievsky. He calls up the whoever was with Reb Chaim, and he says, "Can you do me a favor? Can you get a bracha from Reb Chaim? This is my problem." Reb Chaim, they had a relationship. He says, "This is my problem. Can you get me a bracha?" So he goes to the doctor, And the doctor goes and runs a bunch of tests. And he says, listen, he says, your previous diagnosis that it was a bunch of tumors was incorrect. You don't have any tumors over there. This is actually a problem with your spinal cord. And what you would need is you would need a special epidural injection, and that's going to be your treatment. However, at this point in time, we're still waiting for all the results to come back from the tests that we did. Come back Monday, and then we'll have a conclusive diagnosis for you. So he goes over to the doctor and says, fine, first of all, I appreciate you letting me in, but, assuming this is the right diagnosis, what's my prognosis? Like how long do I have to suffer with this agonizing pains? So the doctor goes and says, listen, he says, your pain probably will last in about 6 weeks. However, you will need to go physiotherapy for about a year, or better yet, at least a year. So this rabbi was shocked. He's like, 6 weeks? He was barely able to survive, this almost, it hasn't even been 1 week, he's barely able to survive. You're telling him 6 weeks now? The next day, Thursday morning, this was one full week from the onset of his pain. His wife told him that, he's going shopping, she's going shopping. So he asked her, he says, do me a favor, lock the door. I can't see any visitors right now. I'm in too much pain. I don't want anybody to come in right now. I need to rest. So she says, fine. She takes the lock and she locks the door. A short while later, the doorbell rings. And, he's sitting in bed and he's ignoring it. He's in too much pain to even, deal with it. But the doorbell doesn't stop. It's like ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, keeps on going. And he keeps on ignoring it. 30 seconds go by, and all of a sudden there's knocking on his door, and the knocking doesn't stop. She's like, what's going on over here? So he screams out to the door. Israel apartment's a little bit small. You could actually scream from your bedroom to the door and they could hear you. And he screams out the door. He's like, who's there? So he says, this is, Yeshayahu Epstein, Rabbi Yeshayahu Epstein. He was Rav Chaim Kanievsky's driver. And he says, what can I do for you? He says, the Rav is downstairs in the car. He wants to come up to visit you. And he's like, what? He's like, Rav Chaim came to my house to visit me? And he jumps out of bed, starts hopping on one foot, trying to go and open the door. In Israel, at least the majority of the doors that I've encountered and the majority of the doors I know, the way that it works is that the locks, there's a key in the outside and there's a key in the inside also. That's how generally you lock the door. So there was a key on both sides. So the door was locked by his wife from the outside. Now he had to find his key to unlock it. But the problem was he hasn't used the key in over a week, and he's trying to fumble around, try to find the key. Rabbi Chaim's downstairs and he's hopping from one end to the house to the other end of the house, trying to find the key, but he couldn't figure it out. He couldn't find the key, and he goes over to the driver and says, I'm sorry. He says, I can't get the key. I don't know where the key is. I can't open the door. So he says, "Fine, I'll tell the Rav that you don't have that you're not able to open the door." So he goes down to Rav Chaim Kanievsky, and he says, "There's no need for you to go upstairs. The door is locked, and we can't get in." And he says, Rav Chaim says, "What do you mean the door is locked?" He says, "Yeah, he can't find the key in order to open the door." So Rav Chaim goes to him and says, "How do you know this information?" And he says, "No, we spoke through the door. I'm saying we weren't able to see each other, but we spoke through the door." So he says, "Oh, you spoke through the door? Okay, not a problem. So I'll speak also through the door." And Rav Chaim makes his way upstairs. He gets upstairs, and all of a sudden there's another knock on the door. So the rabbi was sick, was with pain. He's like, yes. He's like, who's there? And Rav says, the Rav is right outside. And he's like, the Rav. He goes over to the Rav. He's like, the Rav obviously knew that he couldn't open the door. So he goes over to him and he starts, says, Rabbi, he starts crying bitterly. He says, I'm suffering in terrible pain. So Rav Chaim calls out to him. He says, Rav Nassan, refuah shalema, refuah shalema. And he goes on and he says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should send you a swift and quick refuah shalema. Rav Chaim started descending, going down the stairs, and the rabbi calls him out again, and he says, Rabbi, please, the pain is overwhelming, I can't handle it. So Rav Chaim called out again, he should have a speedy refuah shlema. Rav Chaim went down the stairs, and this man hopped over to the window to watch Rav Chaim get into the car. He watched Rav Chaim to get to the car, and Rav Chaim realized, figured that he's probably, and before Rav Chaim goes into the car, he looks up again and to the apartment, and he sees, the Rav standing over there. And Rav Chaim calls out to him. He says, you should have a quick and speedy refuah shalema. He says, the Rav goes and says, I watched the car until it went out of sight. And then I went and I started walking back towards my bedroom to go rest. Halfway there, he goes and he says, I realize I'm walking on both my feet and I don't have any pain. And I'm like, what? And I put weight on it, and I put weight on this one. Like, sometimes you forget which one is hurting you. Like a kid gets a boo-boo, and then they're like, oh, it hurts. I need a lolly, I need a candy, I need all these things. And then like 5 minutes later, yeah, it still hurts. And it's all of a sudden it's the other side. And he's like, wait a minute, and he goes back and he's like, the pain is gone. The pain was literally gone. And he sits and at this point, he's standing in his living room. The pain is gone, and he starts dancing. He starts dancing in the middle of his living room by himself, no music. Just dancing around, thanking Hashem. It is to this scene that his wife opens the door and walks in to see her husband, who was not that long ago sick in agonizing pain in bed, now dancing in the middle of the living room. And she's like, what you doing? What's going on? Like, what's going on? And he goes and he says, the pain is gone. And he goes and he says, Reb Chaim came, gave a bracha, multiple brachas, and by the time he left, the pain was gone. And so she's like, that's amazing. She says, but why are you dancing? I understand, what's with the dancing? And the rabbi goes and says, I wasn't able to dance in Simchas Torah with the Torah, so now I'm dancing to make up for it. And at this point, the wife was extremely appreciative, and the wife goes and says, you should call Reb Chaim and let him know what happened. So he goes and he calls the driver, Rav Epstein, and he says, you have to tell Reb Chaim this. He says, immediately after Rav Chaim Kanievsky left my apartment, drove away, he says the pain subsided, there was no more pain there. So this Rav Epstein goes over and tells Rav Chaim, and he says, look what happened. He says, the Rav came, gave a bracha, and the pain went away. So Rav Chaim says, dismissed it, in his humility. He's like, there's a Gemara Megillah, page 15a, that says that even a simple person's blessing can be effective. This is what Rav Chaim Kanievsky says. Later, a short while later, this sick Rav, the Rav who was, with the agonizing pain, went to visit Rav Chaim and thank him in person. And again, he goes and says, because the Rav came and then, came, gave me a bracha, and then all of a sudden all went away. And Rav Chaim goes and dismissed it. He's like, what, are you trying to make another story about me? He's like, what, you make another, maisa about me? And he says, it's simple. There's a Gemara in Avodah Zarah, page 55a. And he goes and says, the Gemara goes and says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu goes, and when HaKadosh Baruch Hu inflicts a illness, a suffering, a pain upon a person, he makes it swear, the pain, so to speak, that it will begin to afflict the person at a specific time, and it would leave either at a specific time or through the efforts of a specific doctor, or through a specific medication. So, and in the Chaim goes and says, the Gemara says that even if the sufferer worships his idols, Avodah Zarah, he says if the illness was supposed to leave at that time, the illness would leave it, and the guy might think, oh, it was because of X, Y, and Z. It was a time that was meant for that illness to leave. So he says, I happened to get in the right time, right before the illness was supposed to leave, and that's why, this person is no longer sick. Not that I had, if Chaim in his humility, it's like, not that I had anything to do with it. So the following Monday, the Rav returned to Professor Deckel for a follow-up appointment. And the Rav just walks in. Before he was hopping and in pain and wheelchair and all that. Now he's just walking in. And the professor is he's like, Rabbi Einfeld, is this you? And he's like, listen, I don't have a twin. He says, yeah, this is me. He's like, he's like, how are you walking? So he says, a great healer came to visit me and cured me and completely healed me. And he says, what do you mean? What are you talking about? He says, I had the Rav Goyin, Rav Chaim Kanievsky came to visit me, gave me a blessing, and it healed me. Now, the professor, did a, thorough examination, and he goes on, he says, and the professor goes and says, had I not seen this with my own eyes, I would have never believed that God performed a miracle. This is an open miracle straight out. I cannot begin to understand it. And then he said jokingly, he says, can I send to the rabbi some of my patients that maybe he could, go and heal? However, the doctor goes and says, even though it's gone now, this issue can return at any moment without warning. You have to be very careful to avoid any exertion on this. So the rabbi goes and says, listen, my son is getting married in a few weeks. He says, can I dance with my son at the wedding? So the doctor goes and says, that absolutely not. He says, that type of strain is going to bring all your pains back. So he says, okay, fine, thank you very much. And he, a short while later, he goes back to Rav Chaim Kanievsky. And when he goes to invite Rav Chaim Kanievsky to the wedding, he says, by the way, I went to the doctor, the professor, and he told me that I can't dance at my son's, wedding. And by the way, this is only a gadol could say what I'm going to say the following. And Rav Chaim goes and says, what? He says, chas v'shalom. He says, the pains will not return. He says, not only that, I will dance with you at the wedding. And indeed, Rav Chaim came to the wedding and he danced together with this other Rav. And the Rav who's saying over the story says, to the date of whenever he said the story, he has not suffered a reoccurrence of this pain. And I might add that this type of pain has been happening many times in his life. The lessons that you could take out from this story, number one, is the humility of Rav Chaim Kanievsky. Like the true humility. Like, how sometimes, like someone tells you something and you're like, nah, it has nothing to do with me. You act all humble, but really inside you're like, come on. Like I literally said like 6.5 chapters on Tehillim, for you. I stopped speaking Lashon Hara for an hour a day so that, this could happen. Like I've done 40 days of saying Az Yashir or something, and, I've baked challah once a week, like, I know, no, it wasn't for me, but between me and God, yeah, we know. We know why. Who else needs a bracha? Just line up over here, I'll have my, open house when people can come to see me from 9 to 10. And, there's humility, but then there's a different level of humility. The different level of humility is where you have Rav Chaim Kanievsky go, and not only did he say, nah, it wasn't me, he brought a proof that it wasn't him from a Gemara. He was like, no. There's the Gemara over here, the Gemara in Beit Zara, page 55a. Oh, no. It's not that. It's a different. He would go and he would bring different sources to even prove that it's nothing to do. This is the true humility, the true anivas that we can only begin to try to work on. But another lesson that we can learn from this story is look at, the chesed that a gadol who is so busy. Oh, so busy. No time at all. Like, if you think you're busy, forget about it. No time. And he had time to go and visit somebody, to go and take a minute. And maybe you can't visit somebody. Someone's sick, someone's, family member passed away. Pick up a phone. Call them. Wish that, get something. Such a lesson. No matter how busy we are, it doesn't hurt for you to go and pick up the phone. There were times where, let's say there was a Shiva call, and I couldn't make it, so I called over the phone, and it was a type of thing that I wouldn't, sometimes you're like, okay, I'll go to the Simcha, they won't even know I'm there. I'll go to the Shiva call, they won't even know I'm there. It was one of those situations, and I was so shocked. The person on the other end was so appreciative. He's like, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you calling and you, whatever it was, you coming. And, many times we think the person's not going to care if I come visit them. The person's not going to care if I come and send them a text message, oh, how are you feeling? The person's not going to care if I send them a mazel tov. No, you don't know. You never know. You never know where that person be like, wow, that is I'm so appreciative of that. The chesed that we have to go, that no matter how much, difficulty we have in our day-to-day schedule, if we could just put a little bit of time aside to do that little extra chesed. Rav Chaim used to daven vasikin in the, his vasikin minyan in the shul nearby, the Letterman shul, and at one point there were two mourners that wanted to daven in front of the Amud to lead the prayers. And one was the name of Avram, and the other one name was David. But the problem was that they both needed to daven that day. So they went over to Rav Chaim and says, who's going to daven? So Rav Chaim goes and he says he's going to do a gairel. A gairel is like a lottery. He says, we're going to do a lottery. And he says, what we're going to do is, he says that he's going to open up his siddur, and if the first letter on the page is an aleph, then Avram, which starts with an aleph, will lead the prayers. If the first letter is a dalet, that's for David, and then David will go and receive, and he will be the one to go and to lead the prayers. And this type of method, this is based off the famous something that's called the Gairil Hagra. The Gra, the Vilna Gaon, had this Kabbalistic type of gairil that you were able to get certain answers for certain questions. The particulars of how this gairil works was this Rab Aryeh Levin. Rab Aryeh Levin was Rebbetzin Kanievsky. So Rab Chaim Kanievsky's wife's grandfather was Rab Aryeh Levin. He received it from his grandfather, Rav Chaim Berlin. which is named after the yeshiva in in Flatbush, Chaim Berlin. The Garel, there was a specific formula that you have to search within Tanakh, and you turn a certain amount of pages, so on and so forth. Not only that, it's very interesting. Rav Aryeh Levine actually had a Tanakh that was printed with like dual columns, and this he received from his grandfather, who is said to be that this is the very same Tanakh that the Gra used to perform the Gairel with. This is the actual Tanakh that the Vilna Gaon used to do the Gairel with. And it's interesting, on this Gairel, his Rav Chaim Kanievsky's grandson, Rav Gedalia Honensberg, he said that there was a certain yeshiva that had a lot of there was a lot of stolen items, let's just call it like that, things that just turned out missing. There was a thief on the loose. So the students, they came over to Rav Chaim and they asked, he says, can we perform the Gairel Agra to identify the thief? And by the way, this Gairel was used in very interesting different cases to identify certain bodies of certain soldiers and things like that, but we're not going to get into into all the specifics on it now. But he goes and they ask Rav Chaim, can we do this to find out who the thief is? So they were basically asking Rav Chaim, can we do this Gairel? So I don't know if they were trying to figure out like how he did it and what was the formula. I don't know the details behind it, but Rav Chaim answered. He says that not everyone is worthy of receiving a heavenly response in this manner. This is like a type of thing like, don't try this at home. They exist, but chances are we're not on the level to go and to do this. However, he gave them a bracha. They should be able to find this this thief. It's interesting when you're there was another story, and in fact, the Rav Chaim in general opposes to use. He doesn't like using the gorel, these gorel, except when it's absolutely necessary. There was once a boy and a girl that were dating, and the girl had some sort of health issue. And they told the boy's family this, by the way, up front, this is the health issue, and they knew about it. And they were about to get engaged, and the family again were like, by the way, this is the issue, I just want to make sure that you are aware of the issue. They were like, yeah, but I'm saying like, how are we supposed to check it out? So they said, listen, he says, if you don't want to, if you're not sure to check it out, let's go to Rav Chaim Kanievsky, and whatever he says, that's what we'll do. And they both agreed. So they go over to Rav Chaim, and they say, this is the situation. The girl has a medical problem, and they're about to get engaged. Should they continue with the engagement or not? So Rav Chaim Kanievsky goes and says, this is a hard question. He says, I cannot give a psak on this, but bring me a chumash. And they bring him a chumash, and he takes the chumash, and he goes over to the two fathers that were standing with him. And he goes and he says, I'm going to open the chumash. Whatever the Gairel that he did beforehand, he says, I'm going to open the chumash. He says, by the page that I land on, if the first letter is a chaf, then it's Cain, because Cain is yes in Hebrew, it starts with a chaf. If the first letter is lamed, then it's no. Meaning that Rav Chaim Kanievsky goes over to these two men and he says, I'm going to open up a chumash at random. And there's going to be only two possible options. Either there's going to be a lamed or a chaf. It's not like one of those things like, okay, let's try it. Okay, let's best out of 3. Okay, let's try it, best out of 7. We couldn't find it yet. Until you figure out. Rav Chaim Kanievsky was like, listen, there is going to be either a chaf or a lamed. Those are the only two options. By the way, open a chumash. See what percentage of times you get a chaf or a lamed. See how many times it takes you to get a chaf or a lamed. So he takes the chumash. He opens it up, it's a chaf. He looks at them and he says, Mazel Tov. And they ended up getting married. And they, at this point in time, they're Baruch Hashem happily married, and they have a child. This story was told to me personally by one of the fathers that were by the what's it called, by Reb Chaim Kanievsky. But like when he was telling me the story, he was like, "Do you understand?" He says Reb Chaim was certain that there's either going to be a chaf or a lamed. That's it. There was no other alternative that will happen. Like this is, somebody on this level can do the Gairel, any of these Gairelas, the Gairel Agra. But for us, it's not. But look how he was connected to the spiritual. This is somebody in our generation. It's crazy. To speak about the heavenly responses, there was a famous story that went out, right after, well, it was also before, but even more so after Reb Chaim passed away. In fact, this was said over by his brother-in-law, Yitzchak Zilberstein, in his Levaya. It said over this story. Whoever watched the Levaya or listened to the Levaya, or was actually present by the Levaya, he says that, and by the way, this story, I'll just tell you what the idea, this is the story of the grasshopper. And I'm sure if anybody's learned, this story was like viral, all over the place. And I saw a bunch of different versions of this story. So I'm going to share with you the version that I actually saw written. This was before Reb Chaim was nifter. This was written. So Art Scroll came out with Reb Chaim Kanievsky and the Chumash. So Reb Chaim Kanievsky on the Chumash in Parshas in Sefer Vayikra, Parshas Shmini, the 11th chapter, the 22 pasuk, there speaks about grasshoppers. There is says over there the story of what I'm about to share with you, the story that went viral right after Reb Chaim Kanievsky was nifter. To make matters more interesting, Parshas, when Reb Chaim Kanievsky was nifter on a Friday, the Levaya was on a Sunday. That Sunday, what was the parsha? What was the parsha of that week? The parsha was Shmini. Meaning the story that went viral was written in the parsha that he was nifter in on the story of the grasshopper. So let me share you the story of the grasshopper if you haven't heard about this yet. So Reb Chaim Kanievsky was working on a sefer about the signs of kosher locusts, the kosher grasshoppers. And they knew that there was like a story going around, this is while he was alive, about this grasshopper. So they one of his grandchildren went over to Reb Chaim and he says, Saba, Grandpa Zaidi, what's the story with the grasshopper? And Reb Chaim Kanievsky says, he also dismissed it. He said, what, you want to remember every single story that happened 100 years ago? You push away. But the Rebbitzin, his wife, heard them asking, and he says, I'll tell you what happened. So he says that Reb Chaim Kanievsky, she goes, was working on a very unique sefer, discussing in detail the complex signs that Chazal said that one can identify the kosher species of a locust, of a grasshopper. And there was a certain technical details that was unclear to him. So Rebbitzin Kanievsky said, I asked our neighbor, Rebbitzin Reichman, who was a science teacher, if she could get me a book about grasshoppers, and maybe he would be able to go and get more information. So they got the book. However, it was still unclear on what Reb Chaim needed clarity on certain things. And that Shabbos, says the Rebbitzin goes, and says in the middle of our Shabbos Suda, a grasshopper, a locust, just suddenly flew in through the window and landed on our table in front of Reb Chaim Kanievsky. And Reb Chaim starts staring at the locust, starts looking at it from all different angles, from back and forth. And then when Reb Chaim finished studying this locust went and jumped out the window. And the Rebbitzin goes and says, just so that you understand, he says, we don't live in a locust-infested environment. He says, never once before had a grasshopper, a locust, jumped into the table, jumped in through the window and landed on the table. And Reb Chaim Kanievsky says, okay, now I understand what I was looking for, and he was able to finish the sefer over there. And the Rebbitzin goes and says, there's a second part to the story. Sometime later, he says there was a young man that came to Reb Chaim, and he asked him for mechila, for forgiveness. He says, what was going on? He says he was in yeshiva, and the Magachir was going and the rabbi giving the lecture was going and giving over the information about grasshoppers. They were learning about grasshoppers, and then they said a story about Chaim Kanievsky. He was sitting and learning, and he needed a certain idea of that. So God sent him a locust to his table. He was able to get all the answers that he needed, and then it flew out. Now this boy, he was like, you know how they say stories of, rabbis. It's exaggeration, or maybe it was made up. Come on, really? A grasshopper? Just when he was looking for something, a grasshopper came. Come on, do me a favor. It's all made up. And this is what the boy says over. He says, that's what I said. He says, I went after the shir to my dorm, to my room, and my dorm was infested with locusts all over, grasshoppers all over. No other rooms in the entire house were affected except for my room. And I was like, all right, there's a certain time where you're like, this is not coincidence. This is not a random occurrence. And he says, I ran over to the Rav and I want to ask for mechila for doubting what happened. So Rav Chaim Kanievsky says, there's nothing for you to even feel sorry about. Return home, there's no issue. He was Michael, forgive them. It says, when the man returned home, the locusts had disappeared as if they've never been there before. And it's interesting, many years later, after the Rebbitzin passed away, there was a renovations that were happening in Rav Chaim's apartment so that the children would be able to take care of him easier. And Rav Chaim, was learning through all these renovations, through all the construction, and all of a sudden the workmen wanted to break down a certain section of the wall. And Rav Chaim went and stopped and intervened and says, no, don't break down this wall. And they're like, well, we need to, and he says, no. He says, this is where the locust jumped in. He says, I want to always remember this wall. Please leave this wall alone. So this is the story that's written down. There's a third part to the story, which I haven't seen written down. And that's why I'm saying, I don't know if it's true, I don't know if not, but I'm going to share with you because it's just like a part of it. The first two parts that I just told you right now, that's written in the book on Rav Chaim Kanievsky on the Chumash. But the third part is very interesting. So there was a professor, a specialist, who came to Rav Chaim Kanievsky, who read his sefer. He was a specialist in grasshoppers. I don't know, in what particular or insects, whatever it was. He was a specialist, and he says, Rav Chaim Kanievsky was talking about a rare grasshopper. And the conclusion that Rav Chaim Kanievsky came in is incorrect. This professor of insects, whatever, came and said. And they were discussing it back and forth. While they're discussing, this rare grasshopper comes between them. And Rav Chaim's like, well, let's look at it. And they start looking at it, and it turns out that Rav Chaim Kanievsky was right. And the professor was wrong. The second part of the story I haven't seen written down, but I've been heard it circulating. So I was thinking about this story because the story was going viral, and I was like, why did Rav Yitzchak Zilberstein, out of how many stories? I mean, we're literally speaking over 3 hours on stories of Rav Chaim Kanievsky. We have so much information on Rav Chaim Kanievsky. When Rav Yitzchak Zilberstein, his brother-in-law, was saying over, why did he pick this story to say over in the funeral as opposed to all the other stories? And I don't know his reasonings behind it. I didn't have a chance to ask him. But in my mind, like I was thinking about it, I'm like, this shows a manifestation of God assisting in Rav Chaim Kanievsky in his learning. This is like where you have like the rabbi going and doing miracles, right? We know HaKadosh Baruch Hu Tzadik Geizer, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mekayim. We know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu listens to tzaddikim. However, this is something different. This is something where Rav Chaim was learning something and he needed clarity, and God gave him a special siyata d'shmaya, special heavenly help. And the lesson that I took away from this is that sometimes we're learning something or we're trying to accomplish something, or we're struggling with something, and all of a sudden HaKadosh Baruch Hu goes and sends us this type of Yeshua. Like, it usually comes in a roundabout way. But the difference over here with Rav Chaim, this was Rav Chaim learning about something, and you see the outright open manifestation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu going and assisting him in his learning. Like, that's something that is such a powerful lesson, that also a lesson for us that we should never give up. Like, yes, we're not on the level on Rav Chaim, but we see in our own life how HaKadosh Baruch Hu assists us and helps us and guides us. And all of a sudden, in hindsight, we look back and be like, you know what? I was in a really dark place over here. I was in a really difficult time over here. And all of a sudden, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent this and this. And it's sort of like, whether it was a good shir to listen to, a rabbi to talk to, a mentor to talk to, a good roommate, a friend, and all of a sudden it made me feel better. It made me, we see the salvation that happens in our own life. And we have to take that and realize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu goes and is looking out for each and every single one of us. There was a young man from a traditional family that he went and he was becoming more observant. And the problem is that his name was Nimrod. Let me repeat that. His name was Nimrod. Nimrod, the translation of Nimrod means we will rebel. Right? That's not a good name to name your child. And not only that, it's named after, there was a wicked king who wanted to go and burn Avram Avinu alive. That was Nimrod. Nimrod was not a good character. But what you have is, and you have the lefty, people in Israel who want to try to stray as much, sort of as go against, the Torah. They call, exactly. It's like naming your son Paro, or like, why would you name your son Hitler? Like, like, it's like why? Why would you? It's obviously you want to send a message out there. So this Nimrod was becoming more observant. So he was like, how am I going to go around with the name of Nimrod? I'm a from Jew. Like, what's your name? Shidachli for what? For Nimrod? Come again? Like what? Nimrod ben what? Ben Hitler? Like what's going on over here? And so he goes over to Rav Chaim and says, maybe I need to change my name. My name is Nimrod. And Rav Chaim looks at him and he says, Nimrod? He's like, your name is not Nimrod. Your name is Shaltiel. There's a pasuk in Chagai, the first pasuk in the first chapter, there's a name, Shaltiel. He says, that's your name, Shaltiel. He says, what are you talking about, Nimrod? And he's like, well, no, my name is Nimrod. Like that's, and Rav Chaim is like, your name is Shaltiel. So he goes home to his mother, and he goes over to his mother, and he's like, listen, he's like, Ma, I don't know what to tell you. He says, I went to the rabbi. Apparently my name from now on is no more Nimrod. I'm now going to be referred to as Shaltiel. The mother looks at him, turns white, her jaw drops, and she's like, where did you get that name? What said that name? Who told you for name of that? Like, what? And she's like, slowly composed herself, and she's like, when you were 8 days old, you had a bris. And at your bris, we named you Shaltiel. But a very short while later, we were like, what did we name him that? Shaltiel is such an old-fashioned name. We decided to call you by a more modern name. We called you Nimrod. He says, but nobody knows. Who told you? And he starts saying, he says, Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Just like, Reb Chaim Kanievsky goes in. This boy says, hi, my name is Nimrod. He's like, no, that's not. Like, what? Like, you try this anywhere else, you're starting a fight, right? Like, no, I know my name. This is my bad. He's like, no, your name is Shaltiel. Like the Reb Chaim was connected to I can't even begin to explain this. Like where do you begin to explain such a last class we spoke about, okay, someone did a certain sin, so there was a certain animal, according to the Arizal and Kabbalah, that there's different pictures that come on a person's forehead when a person does a certain sin, like his name, Reb Chaim knew his, it's something, so what we associated with a lot, we associate with the Reb Chaim's gadlus was in his learning, non-stop learning Torah. And again, I can't say this was the reason, because only HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows. But we know one of the many amazing character traits of Reb Chaim was his non-stop learning of the Torah. Not only that, like his memory, like he reviewed it, he remembered all of it. Listen to this crazy story. There was a certain Talmid Chacham that went, and he was writing this sefer on he was sort of putting a new edition on the Gur Aryeh, which is a work on Rashi by the Maharal. And he came across in Parshas Vayechi that the Maharal writes that the Chazal brings down that B'tchias HaMesim, when the dead will be resurrected after Mashiach comes, they will be transported to Ma'aras HaMachpelah, to where, in Chevron, I don't know, with Ma'aras Machpelah, I'm trying to remember the English translation, double cave, whatever it was, in Chevron, and there they will rise from there. So the Maharal, however, doesn't cite the source of where this Chazal is located. And at this point in time, when he was, producing this new version of the Gur Aryeh, he goes over and he starts searching for this Chazal, but he couldn't find this Chazal. And at this point in time, there was no search engines where, there was like a Oitzar Chachma, you're able to search in, and then, everything pops up to you on the computer. The only search engines that were available back then were human search engines, people that learned a lot and were able to remember all the sources. So he goes, everybody that he knows, every human search engine that he knows, he went and he asked all the Talmidei Chacham, do you know where this source is? And everyone's like, no, we never heard about it. Finally, he goes in desperation. One of his friends goes and says, listen, there's a guy in Kiryas Arba, and this guy's life work is to collect information about Chevron and Ma'aras HaMachpelah. And he says he collected all rabbinic literature and put it into one source. This is part of the rabbinic literature. This is part of the literature that you're looking for about Ma'aras HaMachpelah, Tchias HaMesim. Go to him. If somebody knows where it is, he knows where it is. So he goes, and finally getting in touch with this person, which was difficult as it is. He says, listen, I'm writing this, I'm putting a new version out of the Sefer. He says, this is what the Chazal says, that Tchias HaMesim, all the dead are going to go into Ma'aras HaMachpelah, and from there they're going to go and they're going to rise from the dead. Do you know the source? And he says, This doesn't sound familiar to me, but let me review my notes and let me get back to you. A week later, this man calls back, the author, and he says, listen, I checked through all my notes, and I can't find a source for, Maharal's statement. He says there are only two possibilities. Either the Maharal had access to a source that is no longer available to us, or he was interpreting a Chazal differently than it appears to us. So the author didn't have any other option, but when he was writing the Sefer, he wrote source unknown. Couldn't source it. A short while later, he was walking in Bnei Brak, near Rehov Rashbam, which is where Reb Chaim Kanievsky used to live, and he saw that Reb Chaim Kanievsky was walking alone. And he decided, let me take the opportunity, let me ask him, maybe he knows where it is. And he ran over to Reb Chaim Kanievsky, and Reb Chaim Kanievsky listened over to his question, and then he began to, talk to, very, very low Reb Chaim. So the author went and he bent over to try to listen to see what Reb Chaim was saying. And Reb Chaim was saying the following. He's like, Bavli? No. Yerushalmi? No. Mechilta? No. Sifra? No. Sifri? No. Pausing by a minute. The Medrash Agada? No. He was going through this within seconds. He was saying Bavli, stopping, say no. Then he goes Zohar, and at this point he stops. Rav Chaim turns to the author, and he says, look at the Zohar in such and such a place, maybe it's there. The author thanked him, ran over to the nearest shul, the nearest base medrash, opened up this Zohar, and opened up the location where Rav Chaim says, and lo and behold, it's exactly the source was where he found it. But can you imagine, and this is the author, was going, he says, Rav Chaim Kanievsky was reviewing literally the entire body of Chazal in 90 seconds. He was Bavli, no, like his computer. He went through the entire, the entire oral law. He went through until he found it. How, you think about it. You want to go and you want to search it. It'll take you, a few hours if you're a genius and you have all this farm in front of you, or a few days, maybe not. If you have a computer, it would still take you. Rav Chaim did it in a mere, under 2 minutes. He went through everything and he found the exact source. Do we understand? Just to get you the understanding of it. So you're listening to a class right now. And these type of classes, I'll just put it out there, it's a very easy listen, right? There's not a lot of thinking that you have to do. It's stories and lessons. It's very easy, very comfortable, very relaxing. And might I say, maybe not from mine, but other people's classes are enjoyable. You hear stories and things like that. Maybe I speak too fast. Who knows? I don't know. Maybe tomorrow, yesterday. What am I saying? Words, English, Torah. Okay, so now, when you think about it, so you just listen to an easy class. You finish a class. We're, I don't know, blank % done. I don't want to give up. So how much we're done of this class. If you stop for a second right now, how much of the class do you remember? How much do you actually remember from, what was spoken? Again, it was an easy class. It was not a hard class. It was a story here. How many stories do you remember? How many things like that? And stories are very easy to remember. Do you understand, we go and we sit and we learn for an hour. We come out of that learning session, let's call it. What do we take away? How much do we remember from that? Do you know what it takes that you're able to go and review everything and know exactly where it was located? And I'll tell you one up. Imagine somebody goes and asks you, I put out a few sources, the Gemara Megillah, a few Gemaras, and maybe very few sources that I mentioned today. And if somebody would go and ask you, where is this source or whatever it is? And we spoke about it right now, and you were listening, you were paying attention, assuming that you're not on the phone playing Angry Birds or whatever it is that people are playing nowadays. Imagine that you were listening and you were playing and you were, not listening and playing. You were listening, you were focused. Do you remember the source that we just said, a mere, 20 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago? Maybe yes, maybe not. But if you would want to go and as a takeaway, that when you listen to something, that you're able to remember it. You're able to go and be like, yes, I just heard it and it's here and there. It's this and this source. How are you supposed to, how are we supposed to do that? And I want to tell you, before I started speaking, I remember that I was going to a certain, I used to visit for Rockaway. I used to visit my wife's aunt and uncle every once in a while. And I used to daven with Rabbi Eitan Feiner. And in his shul, the white shul. And Rabbi Eitan Feiner, whoever hasn't heard his shiurim, if you think I speak fast. you're in for a surprise. Rabbi Eitan Feiner, like a genius, like rumbling sources. And I loved his, listening to the classes. And sometimes, even before I started speaking, I liked, if I heard something that I liked, I wanted to write it down. But it was Shabbos, so I couldn't write it down. So he would say something, let's say he would speak in the morning, right before Musaf, he would say something and I found it right, and I wanted to remember it, so the entire day I was reviewing it. And I was reviewing it by Motzei Shabbos, I was able to write up, I would say close to 90%. I was able to get almost everything that he was saying. But how did I remember that 90%? I was reviewing it constantly in my mind, and then I was able to go. So if you want to go and you want to take away, how many times are we sitting in our day-to-day life, and most of the time our brain is just on space out mode? You're just like, what just happened? Like, how am I here? I'm in shul, I'm davening, I forgot about this. Oh my gosh, I just finished Sefer Tehillim, I didn't remember starting it. Somehow I redid my wardrobe, fixed this, I flew to Paris, I came back. You say Tefillah Sederach after you daven, right? Because we're all traveling all over the world. You want to go and you want to remember something, you have to do a little bit of review. So one lesson that we take away, Rav Chaim Kanievsky was constantly in mind in learning Torah. So you're listening to a shiur, you're opening up a sefer, you're learning something. Maybe you won't be able to remember everything, but try to tap into at least one aspect that you learned, one idea, and review that you know that idea. It might be a story. Review that story, that you know that story. Every story has a lesson, and every lesson doesn't have to be by the speaker. You can have your own lesson from the story. So you take something away from everything that you encounter on. How many times in our day, I don't know how many people do this, but before you go to sleep, you do like a cheshbon hanefesh, you think about your day. And how many times you're like, wait a minute, like I was up for like 14 hours, 16 hours. I only remember like 20 minutes. I know I worked for some part of that. I'm pretty sure I drove, where is our, we could utilize our brain so much more. And again, it's hard to jump to utilize your brain to the maximum, but at least when you're learning, when you're focusing, when you're davening, when you're doing something, take one lesson, one idea that you can review after you finish it. This way you take something, you put it in your pocket. You listen to a Torah class, you listen to, you learn something, by the way, even davening, you say something, we daven for sick people. And, you may have a list, you may not, you daven, but you say the words and you leave. But when you leave, does that still affect you? Like maybe the next time you daven for somebody, you say the Tehillim, you say Rafeinu, you say the name, but then you leave that and be like, you know what? Have that in your mind just 3 seconds. Just review what just happened. That keeps things fresh in your mind. That gives that also brings your memory to a much higher level. And I have to say, if you want to get a better memory, I strongly recommend to review things in your mind. I remember when I was in yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael, and I had one of the things that Baruch Hashem I was zeicha to do is to do Gemara by heart, the Gemara Baal Peh, the Shagatai Gemara Baal Peh. The first blot that I did it took me hours, but as I continued doing the Gemara by heart, it became easier because my brain was getting used to it, and it was something that I was. And then when you start learning and you utilize that aspect, what's the aspect that you're just reviewing it in your mind? You're remembering it again and again. If something's important to you, you remember it. So you make it important. You take something away and you put it in your pocket. No matter what class you go to, you're able to learn something from anything. Any shiur Torah that you listen to, you could take away and change your life. Guaranteed. I used to do this in my guys' class, that before we left, we used to go around. I did this, I don't know why I didn't do this more often, but I did this for a short period of time. Before I left, I said, okay, what is everybody going to take away? There's a takeaway. Everybody go around and everybody goes and says one thing that they're going to go and take away from the class. And by the way, you're allowed to copy. There's no, you could say, ditto to the guy before, whatever it was, you're able, but all of a sudden when that mindset is there, now you begin to be like, okay, fine, now I'm there, now let me think about it. What am I going to take away? Moving forward, Reb Chaim Kanievsky, a little bit behind time. We're not doing another one. We're finishing, by the way. We're finishing this week. We're not doing another one of this. Otherwise, we're not stopping. Okay, so we can never finish, but from what I prepared, we're going to try to finish. So Reb Chaim Kanievsky, his mind was always in learning. He was always reviewing. He was always in this mindset that he would eat something, so he would see what's there. He would know what bracha rishona to make, what bracha to make, because he sees the food. But by the time he finishes eating it, and he has to go now and say the bracha achrona, the after blessing. He goes over to who's sitting next to him. He's like, "Do me a favor." He says, "What did I just eat?" He says, his mind was constantly only about learning, reviewing and learning and learning and learning and learning. So he didn't even realize what he ate. He saw it, but it didn't, because his mind was only focused on learning. One time there was a American Rosh Yeshiva that was sharing a tender with Rav Chaim Kanievsky, and when they came back to Bnei Brak, they reached Rehov Rashbam, which is Rav Chaim's house, and Rav Chaim saw that all the people were like fumbling into the pockets. They were looking to pay the driver. So Rav Chaim goes and says, "What are you?" Goes over to the American Rosh Yeshiva and says, "What are you doing? What are you looking for?" And the Rosh Yeshiva goes to Rav Chaim Kanievsky and he says, "I'm looking for shkalim." So Rav Chaim says, "Oh, you're looking for shkalim? There's no problem. Wait 1 second, I have it in my house." So he runs into the house, and just for whoever understands, shkalim is money, and it's like saying dollars in Israel. The currency in Israel is shkalim. So he runs into the house of Rav Chaim, and he comes back, and he hands Rosh Yeshiva a Mishnayos shkalim. There's a Mishnayos also that's called shkalim. And Rav Chaim was sitting in the thing, he's looking, he says, when somebody says, "I'm looking for shkalim," what's the first thing that comes into his mind? Oh, Mishnayos shkalim, right? Doesn't even enter his mind money. Like, what do you mean money? Like, he's like, "Yeah, you're looking for Mishnayos." He says this, and he gives him a Mishnayos shkalim. I was contemplating about to say the story or not to say the story. I was going back and forth. When I read this story, it brought such a smile to my face, and I decided that I am going to say over this short story that because it says, I believe, I don't remember where I read it, but whatever it was, that Rav Chaim went, and later on him and his Rebbetzin would laugh when they would speak about this story. When Rav Chaim was the first date that he went on with his Rebbetzin, with his Kala, he was there, and there was a silence. Rav Chaim Kanievsky was like non-stop learning in Torah. So, after a conference silence, he goes over to this girl that he's dating. He says, so her father was, a huge, the Gadol Hadar. Rebbe Kanievsky's father was was the Gadol. And he goes over, and he says, which was, by the way, Rabbi Yashiv. So he goes over and he says, so to break the silence, he's like, so what's your father learning? He was waiting. He was like, okay, let me speak to learning to this girl that I'm dating with. I said, so what's his breaking of the ice? So what's your father learning? Like, that was where he was. Like, he was like, okay, let me speak to learning. He was so involved in like learning Torah that he went on the date, and he's like, okay, so let's speak about learning. And in hindsight, they go on they laugh about it. But to show you the godless of somebody who's like non-stop learning Torah, and to the point is that, you think, okay, non-stop, he was in a different world, which granted, yes, but he was also very much in this world. Like, after the bar mitzvah, let's say his grandchildren, the family would go and look over the pictures of the bar mitzvah, and Reb Chaim would go and look at the pictures, and there was a picture over there of him. But Reb Chaim, when does he look in a mirror? He goes and he sees a picture of him, and he says, oh, that's my neighbor, Rav zt'l Shapiro. There's a rabbi who looked similar, and in fact, my sister in Israel sent me a picture of this, and I wanted to share it, but it was a very small picture, and I couldn't share it. It was an older man with a white beard, and he's like, oh, he says, here, that's me. And his grandchildren's like, no, he's like, Saba, that's your neighbor. He didn't even know how he looked. In fact, to make matters more interesting, Rav Chaim Kanievsky once came to a house, and there was a mirror. And as he passed by, and he goes and he says, who is that person? And the owner is like, that's a mirror. That's you. he's like that. Like Chaim Kanievsky was so in a different world. Like, even like mirror. Like, this is where his mind was always on learning. And yes, maybe we're not on that level, but maybe for 2 minutes we could be on that level where we're like completely focused and learning. Or even if maybe we're not there yet, where we can be completely focused after the class and take away and review it, then maybe while we're in the class for like 2 minutes, can you focus without spacing out, without you're about to daven for 2 minutes, can you just say all the words? Can you just concentrate for like 1 minute, 30 seconds? Try to take that away and implement it into your own life of what we will do in an extreme focused mindset. The more that you do it, the more that you appreciate it. I can't tell you how awesome it is when you're completely focused and learning, that the whole world is like, it's like you finish learning and you're like, wait, where are, like, what's going on? Like when you're in that zone, there is like, it's like so awesome. I can't tell you. And I wish that it would happen to me more often than it does. But it's like, it's like it's like when you're sitting and you're learning, and all of a sudden it's like, wait, what time is it? Like, you're completely lost in it. But like, how is it possible? It was just like, like whatever it was, 2 minutes ago. How do we jump in? Like, how do you get to that aspect? And by the way, I'm speaking to myself also. You have to zone in. You have to like block out the entire world. And by the way, this is nice and this is great, and this is really what we're speaking about is learning Torah. But the truth of the matter is, you could utilize this in all aspects in your life. You want to utilize it in school, in college, whatever it is that you're doing, you're able to completely focus. You're working, you want to be completely in the zone. You're able to completely do that. Someone's talking to you, you want to be completely focused. You're able to like really zone in. And everything else becomes like oblivious. The idea behind, this concept is like, you think Rav Chaim Kanievsky was a gadol adar. But the truth of the matter is, really scary truth, to be honest, is that really anybody could be a gadol. Rav Chaim Kanievsky had free will. He had choices, just like me and you. Okay, granted, he grew up in the Stipler's house. He grew up, his uncle was a Chazon Ish, all right, so, he had maybe a head start with certain things, but like, the bottom line is he was human, just like me and you. And he had choices, and he had tests, and he had free will, and he made his choices. You look at Bibi Netanyahu, a genius of a man. He could have been a huge Talmid Chacham. Could have. Hopefully, maybe he will. Maybe he will, do tshuva or whatever. But whatever it is, what it would be if Einstein would have, opened up a Gemara and learned? Like, we all have choices. Bibi made a choice. Einstein made a choice. Rav Chaim made a choice. Everybody who's listening to this, who's watching this, who's hearing this, you have a choice. And that choice is going to keep on coming. And what is going to be your choice? Are you going to choose to go to the right, go to the left? Are you going to choose to be successful, to fail? And maybe you'll only choose one successful test a day. But at least you chose one successful thing a day. Don't be one of those people that are constantly failing on everything. Even if what you take away is that you watch a little bit less YouTube, TV, movies, whatever, even that is a success. Even that is an aspect that okay, fine, you succeeded in something. Maybe not fully, but at least you got somewhere. You speak about these godless of these amazing stories and amazing things in life on Rav Chaim or any gadol. Rav Chaim Kanievsky brings down there's another angle that you can have tremendous power in this world, and he brings down in the Archas Yosher. Rav Chaim quotes the Sefer Hasidim that teaches that a person who guards his mouth from prohibitive speech and is always careful to use his gift, the divine gift of speech, for proper things, will be zocha, that everything that he decrees will be fulfilled. And in fact, the Chidah goes and says that one who doesn't desecrate his word will merit that whatever comes out of his mouth will be done. There's a famous story with the Harav regarding, we're not going to get into that, regarding Gehenna and how many souls he was able to take out. I believe it was Harav. He was able to take out a lot of souls from Gehenna because of, one of the reasons he was able to take out so many was because of his power of speech. Like, the more careful you are with speech, the more powerful your speech has. The Chafetz Chaim was extremely careful with monetary matters. And after each volume of his work was going out for print, he would go and he would check it to make sure there was no misprints. So the buyer won't be cheated and getting a defective sefer. So his daughter was 12 or 13 years old, and her father asked her to check a few volumes of Mishnah Berurah before he sells it. So she goes over to him and says, Abba, I'm going to meet my friends now. Later, I'll be happy. I'll check 100 Sfarim for you. When she returned home, she was surprised to see that the table was piled high with 100 Sfarim of Mishnah Berurah. And he goes over and he says, you said that you'll gladly check 100 Sfarim. And the Chafetz Chaim goes and says, a Jew has to be careful not to make empty promises. Now you have to keep your word and check 100 Sfarim. You said something, you got to do it. And in fact, a young man once came to Rav Chaim Kanievsky, and he says, I wanted to take off a day off from work, and I couldn't find an excuse. So he told his manager that his grandmother passed away. And of course, the manager gave him off. He has to go for the funeral, so on and so forth. 2 days later, this man tells Rav Chaim, he says his grandmother, who was healthy, active, suddenly passed away. And he had a feeling that somehow he was responsible for her death by what he said. Now he thought probably that Rav Chaim would console him and say, no, don't worry, everything, So Rav Chaim goes over to him and he says, you acted very improperly. He says, you did a foolish thing. The Gemara tells us in Moed on page 18a that a human speech has power. It's forbidden to say foolish things. He says, now you have to accept upon yourself to study Mishnayos every day for your grandmother's, until your grandmother's yahrzeit for her soul. Like he didn't console. He says, no, he's like, we don't realize the power of speech that we have. There was a couple that they wanted to buy a apartment in Bnei Brak. And they had a growing family, and they were looking for, a specific size on the, specific area, and it wanted to be, obviously a specific price. And they found something. Right location, it had enough space, perfect price, and they were excited to go, forward with the sale. And as they're, coming to see the apartment for the second, third time, there was an elderly woman who just appeared before. How sometimes there's just a person there, and you don't know how they got there, and they're just there. So there's they were looking at a house, and all of a sudden there's an older woman that's just sitting there, and she stops, she blocks the path in front of them. And she goes over to them and she says, you will not buy this apartment. It isn't appropriate for you. And the woman goes on, as if this is not a interesting scenario as it is. She goes, I know that there's a curse on this apartment and you don't want to deal with that. So the husband's how do you know that there is a curse on this apartment? So the woman says, it's very simple. She says, because I am the one who cursed it. And they're like, well, what do you mean? Why would you curse the apartment? And, the woman goes and says, you see, the owner went and built an extension. And that interferes with my privacy. So therefore I cursed him and this apartment. And I'm going to make sure that no one buys this. So they were like, as much as you love a house, apartment, if some random old lady comes over to you and says, hey, by the way, this is cursed, you're going to be like, one moment, let me speak to the real estate agent. It's going to make you, question something. So they're like, what's the story with the curse? And the agent's like, excuse me? And we're like, yeah, the curse on the apartment. You're like, okay, I don't know what you're talking. And he goes and started explaining, there's an old woman who called him and said that there was some sort of curse on the apartment. He goes back to the seller, and the seller says, listen, he says, this is an angry shrew of a woman, and she has no other thing to do other than to complain. But we wanted to build an extension. We went over to the Bezdin of Rav Nissim Karelitz, and he heard both sides, and he allowed us to extend our apartment. And he says, if you want, go to Rav Nissim Karelitz and speak to him about it. They went over to the rabbi, and the rabbi says, yeah, I remember that case very well. He says, the owner had every right to build, and you shouldn't have to, don't be worried at all about this curse. And they went and they bought the apartment. A short while later, there was a bar mitzvah in the neighborhood, and they were invited. They figured, what, perfect, let us go. This will meet all the neighbors. It'll be very nice. So they go and they make their way to the celebration, to the bar mitzvah event. And as they're going in, their neighbor, this elderly woman, was there also, and she looks at them, and she starts screaming on the top of her lungs in front of everybody in this bar mitzvah, liars, cheats, crooks. Deceiving. Says, you and your husband are terrible people. Nothing should ever work out for you in your entire lives. And she continued to scream at them in front of everybody. This woman's face turned from purple to white, to pink, to all the colors of the rainbow, and back again. She has never been so insulted, so humiliated in her life. And she was about to open her mouth. She's done nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong. And she's about to open her mouth. And all of a sudden, she felt someone tugging her very, very anxiously on her sleeve. She turns around, and there was a woman over there. And she says, do me please a personal favor. Do not answer her. She's like, I've never seen this woman before. I just really met that woman before. But she decided she's going to hold herself back, and she's not going to answer this woman. She stayed a few moments in the bar mitzvah, as long as it wasn't obvious that she was running out to cry because of what this woman did. And as soon as everybody continued on with it, she made a beeline right outside the door. The woman that begged her to keep quiet followed her, and she says, let me explain myself of why I asked you not to talk back. He says, my husband and I had been married for many, many years. In fact, we were married for 22 years. And we were trying to have children. We couldn't have any children. And we went over to all the doctors, and we went over to all the specialists, and nothing doing. We went over to all the Kabbalists, all the school. We tried everything. And, went to all the grave sites of all the rabbis, nothing doing. Says at this point, we went over to Rav Chaim Kanievsky. We asked, for a blessing, and he asked us all these questions of all the various things that we've tried, and we explained to him all the things that we tried. After a while, Rav Chaim went and told us, and he said, not everybody is decreed to have children. And the husband was like, please, Rabbi, is there nothing else we can do? So Rav Chaim goes and says, there's one more thing I can suggest, and this is based off of Gemara in Shabbos, page 88b. And it says that if somebody embarrasses somebody, and that person who's embarrassed refrains from responding, from paying back his embarrasser, then that person has a power to bless you. He says, maybe if you find somebody like that and get them to bless you, maybe that will work out. And this woman goes and says, it's been 4 years since the rabbi told us, and we haven't encountered anybody that went and was embarrassed in public. He says, now we see the opportunity, please bless me with a child. And at this point, this woman is already emotional, the woman that got embarrassed. So she starts blessing her with a child. She starts saying Tehillim, and they both say Tehillim, crying, that this woman should have a child. Less than a year later, these two women cried again. But they cried again on the bris of this woman who couldn't have children for over 22 years at her son's bris. That's when they cried. Many times in our life, many times in our life, we come across things that we can either look at as negative things in our lives, or we could look at as opportunities in our life. We could look at things that are maybe more of a negative, severely negative aspect, or we could look at things where like, okay, now I have an opportunity, I have something that I'm able to go and accomplish. We don't realize the power of our speech. We don't realize the power of our blessings. Many times we come across the day where maybe we're upset, we're angry, somebody did something to us. At that point in time, we could look at it as God is punishing us, and sometimes, yes, maybe it is true, or we could look at it as like, okay, now I have an opportunity. If I respond correctly, now I have an opportunity in Eis Ratzon to go and daven. If we look at our lives in this angle, we don't see the problems. We see opportunities. Your spouse is acting not nicely to you. Don't respond back, go and pray for something. Your boss is screaming at you, you messed up, you're tired, you're exhausted, there's so many every time that we overcome ourselves in one way or another, we have an opportunity to go and ask Hashem for something. Granted, sometimes are more powerful than others, but this exists almost on a daily basis. By the way, I just want to put another pointer out there that there's a big skula for having children. Reb Chaim would bring down was to write and publish your Chidushei Torah if somebody who doesn't have any children. I just wanted to put it out there. But I want to finish off with one thought, and we'll finish off with this thought that we hear all these amazing stories about Chaim Kanievsky, and most people will be like, man, I wish I knew this beforehand. Like, how much I wish I could go and get a bracha from him. Had I known all these stories, I would have gotten a bracha. Who knows what I've been able. We have this desire. So, I want to share with you something I heard, and I believe I heard this from Rav Igal Cohen, an Israeli speaker, and he said this over a story about himself. Again, I may be botching it up, so please, but the point is solid. The point is accurate. The details might be a little bit botched because I heard it as sort of as a side passing. But basically, this rabbi had a hard time having children, and he was close with a certain Rav by the name of Rav Moshe Levi. And this Rav, after he was nifter, he found out, this rabbi who had a hard time having children, that this particular rabbi that he was close to had a very, very powerful, blessing for people that if somebody needed children, they went to him and gave them the blessing. And he's like, I was so close to this rabbi. How did I not know this? I could have asked this rabbi for the blessings. So he was upset until he realized, okay, listen, the rabbi passed away. He says, but let me go to the caver. He goes over to the gravesite of this rabbi, and he prayed, and he asked and he prayed and, did something Le'ilui Nishmas, and a short while later, he had a child. And he quotes the Gemara in Chulin, page 7b, that says, Gedolim tzadikim b'misasan yoser b'mechayein. Tzadikim are greater after they pass away, greater than when they were alive. Reb Chaim Kanievsky passed away. We lost something so dear, so precious, so amazing in our world. But the power that he possessed for the blessings, for all these things, that has not gone. If you go and, let's say you can go to the caver, it's in Beit, you're not able to travel, you're in America, wherever you are, you're able to do something Le'ilui Nishmas. You're able to say, okay, fine, listen, I'm learning now Le'ilui Nishmas Rav Chaim Kanievsky. I'm giving tzedakah Le'ilui Nishmas Rav Chaim Kanievsky. The power is still there. You're able to go and still tap into that. Don't think that, okay, fine, it's gone, I can't do anything. No, you could do something. Learn a little bit more. Give tzedakah, do something in merit of this righteous person. And in merit of that, may he go and daven in front of the Kisei HaKavod and provide you for whatever it is that you are searching and you're looking for, which obviously it's really all coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So really the correct bracha will be that may HaKadosh Baruch Hu bless you with whatever it is that you're guiding, whatever it is that you're looking for, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu give it to you in the best way possible.